this is going to be relatively familiar, but just to set some terminology, right? When we talk about the viewports, like that's generally what's seen outside of camera. That's what's used for lighting. That's what's used for reflections. And then we have these inner frustrums, right? Like potentially one or two, right? So this is what the camera sees. This is changing perspective. It's tracked, you know. And so like when we think about the rendering, we're thinking about what's in camera and what's out of camera, and how we like accommodate all of the needs, you know, balance out the resources that we use. So like kind of starting from like the past, right? So building up like from where we started, right? We were originally in like kind of a single GPU machine infrastructure, right? So what that means is that like for a stage like this one at NANT, right? We were 8 viewports, and we had to have 8 machines for each one of those things. You know, kind of laying it out, what that meant was that we had one Unreal instance, right? So it's using one GPU, and it's got to render a lot of stuff, right? It's got to render one outer, and then potentially 2 inners. So for determinism purposes, we have to render the inner on each one. This doesn't leave very much overhead, right? So in the early days, it was really challenging to like get your optimization right to actually like have your scene run at 24 FPS. So in 427, you know, we made this, you know, there was a bunch of like improvements, and this basically allowed you to use a multi-GPU system, right? So 2 GPUs, like reduces the number of machines, right? Like less overhead and more performance available, right? So the way that this distributes itself is like now we have one Unreal instance, got 2 GPUs, and we're doing the outers on one and the inners on another, right? So you're still rendering it on each machine, again for determinism, but like we are able to like dedicate more resources to what's seen in camera, right? So this is more overhead, you know, more availability, so that you can run a higher quality inner frustum, and like, you know, just give your artist more headroom to work with, right? And so at 5.2, there's another like kind of step forward here in the way we do the end-display deployment. So like when you set up your end-display, there's going to be a new way to do that, which you can potentially eke out a little bit more performance. So what we've actually found is that, you know, it's slightly tweaking it. And so instead of running one Unreal instance with 2 GPUs, you split it up so that there's actually 2 Unreals, each with 1 GPU, and it splits it up, right? So like, again, we're still like for determinism purposes rendering the inner frustum on each machine, but what we found is that like a lot of the new rendering features, especially like things like Nanite and Lumen, virtual shadow maps, a lot of that stuff is actually CPU bound instead of GPU bound, and this allows you to like squeeze a little bit more deployment out, or a little bit more performance out of the same deployment. So you don't have to change anything about the way that you have your machines laid out on your stage. You just flip the end-display configuration, you're going to get a little bit more performance out of it, right? So the inner frustum, instead of being transferred over NVLink in an mGPU scenario, we've introduced this new like off-screen rendering feature of end-display, and that shares it over memory, and it does not necessarily require NVLink. The last thing to mention on the performance front is that NVIDIA did come out with a new GPU, which is called the Ada Lovelace, right? So this is a little bit confusing. Like I find it confusing myself, right? So the new GPU is called the RTX 6000 Ada Lovelace. It's not to be confused with the RTX A6000, which you may or may not have on your stage already. This new GPU does not support NVLink, but thankfully our new deployment doesn't necessarily need it, right? And the last thing to note is that these new graphics cards are faster. Like there's a big notable difference, right? So this was a lot of information. Like I find it hard to explain it, to be honest. But I thought it might be good to just quickly go through some examples. Like this is how we test our scenes, and this is hopefully like going to be a representative example of how this is going to apply to yours, right? So first up is our production test scene, right? So this is a scene that a lot of people have downloaded, right? This is the sample. Like this is kind of like the standard thing we use to teach people stuff about in-camera VFX. So if we look at like the way we run tests, so what we end up doing is like we basically take the scene, we try it out in all these different scenarios, and assess what the FPS is that you're getting, right? So this is like an old, like kind of at this point, like UE4-centric scene. And so we run single GPU. We're not at 100% screen percentage. We're not quite at 24 FPS with single GPU, but you can see that if we go to mGPU and then multi-process, like the frame rate availability like ticks up, right? So we're able to hit performance. We're able to shoot with this scene. But you can also notice that the mGPU and multi-process, they're not very different, you know? So when we switch over to the new GPU, you can see there's like a big bump, right? So even with single GPU, you're able to hit frame rate, and you can see like it goes quite a lot higher, right? So that's 50 compared to 30. Pretty big difference with the new GPUs. If you drop it down to 50%, right, this is kind of, we're going to go through this example for each one of these guys, right? So like, when you get into 50% with the new GPU, guys, it kind of gets to like to these absurd numbers like 100 FPS. You never actually run this, but it's just representative of like the evolution of the system, right? So this is more, this is like kind of a newer scene, right? This is from the Valley of the Ancients, kind of one of the original UE5 demos. So with this scene, this is using a lot of the new features. It's a nanite and lumen scene, right? So with single GPU, we're not even close to hitting frame rate at 100%. But with MGPU and multiprocess, we're getting closer. At 100%, the new GPUs like hit it pretty comfortably, right? So now we're up to 36, 38. We're eking out a little bit more performance with the with multiprocess. And even though like you may think it's only two FPS difference between those two things, like for your content teams, like it makes a big difference, right? If they have that extra 2 FPS, like it's a little bit less optimization. You can, if your filmmakers are asking for like a little bit more detail, like that 2 FPS can make a big difference to you. Dropping it down to 50%, like again, we're both pretty comfortably there. But again, like you can see, like there is actually quite a big jump with the new GPUs. Just something to be aware of, especially if you're looking at outfitting like a new system. This is another scene which is like an interior, right? So it's a little bit different, but it's kind of a good example of something where like this is another nanite lumen scene. It's an interior scene. We have a lot of lights in it, right? So it's exercising the system a lot more heavily. So this is one where we're like with the existing graphics cards, it's very challenging to hit it at 100%. And when we shot these scenes, we were not able to run them at 100%. And then with the new graphics card, we potentially could, right? So now it's unblocking the scene, and like you can see the difference between MGPU and multiprocess. We are above now the threshold of 24 FPS. Dropping it down, again, we're like getting pretty comfortable here, but like you'll notice that there is a big difference, right? Even if you're on the the current generation GPUs, like you're getting that 5 FPS by like bumping up your configuration, and we think this is going to make a big difference to like the way that people set up their scenes, offering more to the artists to put them in, put more detail into the scene, put it into like what you're ultimately going to capture on the camera. Last but not least is the city sample, right? So this is like kind of like the real litmus test for nanite lumen. It's definitely like our most complex sample scene. And again, like with the existing GPUs, we're getting pretty close. Like we're a little bit closer at 100% for multiprocess. And then with the new GPUs, we're able to get above it even at 100%. Flipping it over to 50%, like we are still able to hit it now with the existing GPUs. Your mileage will vary, but this is this is likely something that your operators are very accustomed to, where you're like dialing up and down the screen percentage, relying on TSR to do the rest of the work for you, and like make sure that you hit frame rate. Also on the feature side, like getting out of the performance stuff, so like a lot of you are probably very familiar with our color correction regions feature, right? So this is the way that you do a lot of that blending, like you're dialing in, when you go to people, they've got all these like little kind of power windows right there, especially like to make sure that you're blending the, that join where like the where the wall ends, like basically like right here, like where the wall ends and the set begins. You got to do a lot of blending right there. And so, in the last release, we introduced this idea of like per actor color correction. So you can isolate a color correction just to a specific asset within the scene. This didn't support nanite in the last release, but we now do support nanite, which is great because like as people have evolved, people are using the new features. Pretty much all the assets are nanite now, right? So like this was like a big missing thing, and may sound, we show it with this kind of goofy thing, but like when you look at people's scenes, there's like color correction regions all over the place, and that per actor thing makes a big difference. Also for the in-camera VFX editor, like adding on to what we had in 5.1, we've also introduced this concept of a chroma key card. And so this is basically like a light card. You can kind of drag it around the map, just place it exactly where you want. And the idea is that, you instead of like, when you have to, if you have a shot where you have to flip to a green screen, this is allowing you to like basically dial that green screen in, like, minimizing spill, right? Just put that card, place it only where your actor is going to be. To get that, if you have to shoot an element like this, the chroma key card makes a big difference to like just get that like nice element, it's minimal spill, like flip to it really easily and place it really quickly. We've also introduced a new feature to multi-user. So multi-user receive only is, it's kind of like a long-standing request that people have had where you can basically be in multi-user, right, receive everybody else's changes, but isolate yourself like so that you can change it without affecting all the rest of the people, right? So You continue to receive changes live, right? So anybody else that's changing stuff, like you're still going to receive those things, but you don't have to change it. Like you can be modifying the scene yourself without disrupting anybody else, right? So it'll tell you when there's any sort of conflict, right? Like so if you change something that somebody else changed, it's going to at least tell you that happened. But like you don't have to, those people will be isolated from that. And if you're happy with their changes, you can rejoin the session fully, and that's going to push all of your changes back, right? So a lot of times, like when you're on a shoot, maybe the director asks for something, like, hey, can you change that lighting? And the artist on stage maybe wants to like test those changes out, before they actually like push them out. Like maybe that's not going to be something that director wants. Like, set it all up, and you can press that button, and it's all going to flow back. We also have a send-only option. This is kind of like a technical detail, which I'm not sure people are going to use so much, but you could have a case where you're not receiving anybody else's stuff. You make your changes, and then you can potentially push them back. A lot of what we see this being used for is like simulcam, or any sort of live comp scenario where you're running the wall, you need to run it a certain way, but there are certain things that like are only interesting for the live comp. Maybe you have to change your media settings, video input, stuff that is only going to be seen for the comp, but not desired for like what you're shooting on the LED volume. Another thing that it could potentially be good for is virtual scouting, right? So if you're doing virtual scouting session, your director might be messing around. They might be disrupting the other people in it. This just gives them the freedom to mess around without necessarily disrupting what it is that you're trying to review. Next up is what we're calling working color space, right? So like I make this joke, like new in this release is like more settings. But these settings are actually pretty interesting because it allows you to manage the color space of the textures coming in, right? So Unreal Engine assumes a certain texture color space that you bring them in, but especially in your VFX pipeline, you may have assets coming in from other places. They have different color spaces, or something that it makes sense for your pipeline. This gives you the flexibility to say, this is the default working color space that I'm going to import all my textures in, and then it also gives you the ability on a per texture basis to say, well, this one's different, right? I imported this one from the VFX pipeline. It's a different color space. I can manage that stuff coming in so that all of my assets are consistent. This is showing it on the texture, right? So like on a per texture basis, each one of these things has a setting. It can use the default working color space, or you can override it. Last up here on the feature side is our new in-camera VFX iOS app, right? So like this is something you've seen. Like there's a lot of videos like this where people are doing stuff with iPads, manipulating the scene in the volume, right? And so like this is very valuable. Like depending on the deployment of your stage, your Unreal, like your operators might be like really far away from the stage, and a lot of times what you need to be able to do is make these adjustments when you're actually in the volume, like looking at the camera feed, and you want to put that control right in the filmmaker's hands, like something that's really easy. They don't necessarily need to know the full Unreal Engine desktop experience, right? And a lot of times, like you just have to be in the volume to judge it, So we'll step through the app here. A lot of these features are basically like a mobile version of the in-camera VFX editor. So if you're familiar with that feature that we rolled out last release, right, it's going to give you that in-display preview. It's going to let you tumble it. You can zoom in. All of the kind of touch controls to like see where it is in the volume you want to place something, and you can just tap and create a light card. The app is very responsive, right? So this is kind of an example of how you're just moving around a light card. It's kind of like you're dragging a pin around a map. Is the idea, right? So you can easily place that exactly where you want, just with your finger. We've also got an outliner, so a lot of this again is like equating to the Unreal Engine like desktop experience, but you got an outliner just like you do in the desktop. You can see all of the different light cards. You can turn them on, you can turn them off, and then we've got a details panel that lets you make more fine-grained changes, right? So here you're showing like I'm just gonna spin it around. You can move it. You can scale it. Change the color, right? So this is all about just like kind of dialing that light card in, like just right on the spot, from the volume, like very easily, just from the iPad. We've also got a big range of color grading. So in addition to light cards, color grading is another thing that is commonly used, like in the volume rather than like kind of prepped in advance. Stuff that you change in the moment, right? So like in this case, we've got all of the color grading, basically all of the things in the scene that you can color grade, which is primarily end display, but it also includes your post-process volume. And then for end display, we also show the per viewport stuff. So a lot of times you want to color grade only on the ceiling or only on the wall or maybe only on the wild walls. like, if you set that up in your in-display configuration, all of those things are going to be accessible to you from the iPad. So here it is in action, right? So we're just going to kind of tweak things around, make it pink, make it blue, make it green. But again, it's like we really focus on making it responsive, responsive to touch. You're able to just drag that around, dial it in really quickly. We've also got some exposure controls as well. So this should, let's see if that, yeah, so toggle it off, and then you've got these like per stop controls. So you could, like, a lot of times people will be like, hey, can you stop it up? Can you stop it up or stop it down, right? So this is an example of like maybe we want to brighten up the ceiling. We want to get a little bit more light on those actors, like just from the ceiling, not going to be seen in camera. But that stuff is really quick to do from the iPad. Last but not least, we also still support the web remote control tool set. So like if you were already making like kind of some of these like mobile control experiences with the web remote control, that's still supported as well. And there's kind of a built-in tab, so you don't have to context switch, right? So the web remote is really good for custom controls. I've got a blueprint in the scene. I've got something that I want to tweak, like that just makes sense for me. The web remote controls are really great for just letting you dial those in, expose certain properties. And from the app side, we just have a built-in way so that it's just available to you if you set up, right? So those things are, the idea here is that it's complementary. On the app side, we're really focusing on key things like light cards and color grading, and then additionally, we've still got the web remote control. We'll close out with talking about SMPTE 2110, right? So like if you walk around here, there's a lot of people talking about SMPTE 2110, and this is something that we're working on. It's kind of a longer range effort, but we think there's going to be a lot of value here, and we have some stuff to talk about, right? So again, like kind of getting back to this example, like with the way that we currently do the deployment with this like kind of, one machine, 2 viewports, 2 GPUs kind of setup, like we're really focused on this idea of like being able to like reduce the redundancy of the inner frustum, right? So it's kind of wasteful to have to render the camera on each one of the computers. And SMPTE 2110 is going to allow us to maximize the resources, render the camera once, right, and share it across all the others. So this lets us kind of slice and dice the way we do the configuration. Like we get a lot more flexibility, and we're kind of learning what the best optimal thing is going to be. But what that means for us is that we will render the inner frustum once. So again, instead of on each one, like you're using each computer is going to be using resources like for what it needs to do. Like the inner will be rendered once. It's going to share to any of the other machines across this like network-based IP video stream. This allows us to dedicate a full machine to each inner frustum, right? So instead of rendering like both the inner frustum and some additional viewports, we just have one. We just have a dedicated instance that's running that's running Unreal. Like lets us throw like all of the resources at what's seen in camera. We potentially can cover more viewports per machine, right? So that potentially means like less render nodes to run the system, or at the very least, like it gives you options to be like, how do I want to deploy this? Depending on what your scenes are going to be, like what what the size of your volume is going to be. It just gives you a lot more options for how you want to deploy that stuff. Release-wise, we're on a 3-release time frame, right? So in 5.1, we did introduce kind of experimental 2110 support, and this allowed you to basically like send and display out through 2110. Wasn't quite usable yet, but it's like taking us a while like to work with all of the different partners to make sure that this is working well, right? So in 5.2, we now have support for sharing the inner frustum, right? So this is kind of a notable thing where you can, again, render the inner frustum once, share it to the other machines, and send that out to the LED processors. And then in 5.3, like this is basically like the big thing for the release is where we think that essentially this will be a viable option for people to upgrade to. Hopefully this times up with the availability of the different hardware. We're talking to all the LED processor manufacturers. And what this will do is like, in addition to being able to share the inner frustum, it's also going to address this, basically like the Genlock problem, and you will be able to like synchronize, at 24 FPS, like sending this directly out to, you will send the output directly to the LED processors through 2110, and it will be like, in sync. So that's kind of like the last step. This is what our engineering team is working on right now. There is also a potential for a latency reduction in our early tests. There's like a potentially multiple frame improvement in the latency, right? So everybody's familiar with like you move the camera around, it's kind of laggy. right? So 2110, because of basically the optimizations in the signal chain that feeds the LED processor, we are thinking that there is going to be a latency and a reduction. So that's very exciting. Like, our roadmap this time is like a little bit technical. So hopefully this was clear. But that's all I got. Thank you guys. And yeah, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but if left some time for questions, or I don't know how we'll do questions. But if people have questions, I can stick around as well. We can cover anything you need. Yeah.
Ryan, I got it.
Hi, thank you for the information. Just curious, are the features like the web remote and the ICVFX iPad app, are they compatible if you're using a third-party media server like Disguise or something like that?
Yes. So if the integration uses NDisplay, which many of them do, it essentially basically talks to your NDisplay configuration. So as long as the integration you're using is built on top of NDisplay, then it will work.
So Ryan, for the 2110, would that mean in the future that we're going to be able to use less render nodes for dedicated InterFrustum?
Yes, I mean we think so. Like what we're learning about now is what the optimal topology is going to be. Like we have open questions like should we still have like a combination thing where you have one machine, two GPUs, like that runs runs two InterFrustums. Like we're still kind of learning about that. Like kind of the exercise I was showing that where we're like really analyzing all these different permutations of what performance we get. We're like we're kind of like laying the tracks as the train is going over. So we still have more to learn, and I think by the time we hit the 5.3 release, we'll have better recommendations on like what we think the best thing to do is. And another thing that as it's rolling out, like we want to be really transparent about it, because a lot of times, the people with stages, they have a lot of different content. Like they're going to give us better information about what is or isn't working. But in general, yes, we think that you will be able to use fewer render nodes. Because it's easier to like just render the the outer viewports, potentially at lower screen percentage, right? We want to make this a lot easier. Fewer machines, like it's expensive, right? Like rolling out a stage is expensive. You want to upgrade the graphics cards, that's also expensive, right? So like we think there's going to potentially be some nice savings here, and also make it easier to have backups. A lot of these things that are just practical, necessities for how you actually like operate your stage. Not just set it up in the first place, but like operate it in practice, day in and day out, production to production as stuff is cycling through. We think this stuff is going to make a big difference.
Hey, so my question is, where do we go for information like this outside of the trade show? Because like GDC was more game focused, obviously, but there's a big crowd of us wanting ICVFX info. Where do we interface with Epic to get the updates like this?
Yeah, so a lot of basically it'll be a combination of like our official docs. The Unreal Engine release docs will have we'll have these features like just covered in like kind of the stock read the manual type of situation. And there's also an Unreal Engine dev portal. And we're going to be posting, like our team is working on making more of a concerted effort to talk about that stuff, like more of like the less like the documentation is very much like this kind of basic like how to like very literal like property by property, feature by feature type of thing. But we have a big team of like workflow experts that are going to be posting more on this dev portal. Another thing that we're emphasizing on the dev portal are things like driver versions, a lot of information that like helps the stage run, because like sometimes it's not clear if you should or shouldn't upgrade a driver. It's like a lot of times like a driver might be okay for games, but it's not okay for in-camera VFX. So a lot of that stuff will basically be on this dev portal. I think there's a virtual production section of the dev portal, and we're going to be making a concerted effort to post more of this workflow stuff there.
Question about green screen.
Yeah.
Is there any plans to improve the built-in chroma key tools within the system versus third-party ones that are more advanced?
Yeah. So the improved live compositing tools is definitely like a common feature we're asked about right now. from a roadmap perspective, it's something that we're looking towards probably like more for like next year. Like, like what we rolled out is like basically gonna like complete the year for us. Like we've got like 5.2 is coming out now. There's gonna be another release later in the year. But looking ahead, it is a big priority. It's something we were asked about a lot, and hopefully we're gonna be able to like dedicate a bunch of cycles to improving that stuff.